We have with us Dr. Trail Dowie and Nigel Denning, and we're thrilled to present this webinar with PACFA this evening on behalf of Mind Medicine Australia. I'm Tania de Jong, the Executive Director. We're going to start this evening with an acknowledgement to country. We'd like to acknowledge the owners of the lands from which we come, their elders, past and present. We also acknowledge the people who've brought these medicines through the ages to where they are with us today. So these medicines have been around since the beginning of human civilization, and we acknowledge the light keepers and all of the people who've brought them through the ages to us to help heal our civilization today, which is experiencing an enormous amount of suffering. We are going to show a short video to begin with, then we're going to show a short presentation. We're going to go through it fairly quickly. Nigel and Trail will talk to some of the clinical elements, and we want to leave as much time as possible for your questions. What we're going to do is we're going to keep the chat live throughout this whole session, so that if you want to ask questions, please do. We have a moderator who will moderate the chat and reply to some of your questions as you put them in the chat, but then also we'll select as many questions as we can and do a rapid question and answer session in the second part of this presentation. So we've had a huge amount of people respond to this webinar, and we really feel privileged to be with all of you this evening. I think nearly 500 people have responded to this webinar. So thank you all for your commitment to your profession and in caring for people who are suffering in the world that we're in and the troubling times that we're in at the moment. Ilan, if you could show the video to begin with, that'd be wonderful.
Did you know that over 45% of Australians will experience mental illness in their lifetime? That's nearly half of us.
Everything feels flat and grey. I feel ashamed.
Mental ill health devastates lives and families and costs Australians around $60 billion a year. Research and treatment expenses continue to rise, yet rates of mental illness indicate that we're losing the battle. New approaches are urgently needed to address this immense suffering and cost. Psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is currently being trialled worldwide and has demonstrated remarkable promise in treating depression, anxiety, addiction, and post-traumatic stress disorder, with new trials underway for treatment of dementia and anorexia. The treatment combines a short program of psychotherapy with just a few medicinal doses of psilocybin or MDMA. In the 1950s and 60s, psychedelic treatments had a major impact in psychiatry, and many considered it the next big thing in mental health treatment. But for political reasons, the Nixon administration criminalised the use of psychedelics and effectively stopped all research. That research has finally begun again. With proper clinical support, psychedelic treatments are safe and frequently lead to remission after only a short program, and even where current treatments have failed. Here at Mind Medicine Australia, we believe everyone should have access to the best treatments for mental illness. We will seek to establish best practice in regulated psychedelic assisted treatment. Mind Medicine Australia is wholly focused on the clinical application of psychedelic medicines. We're preparing for change by developing therapist training, ethical guidelines, a centre of excellence in psychedelic medicine, educational material and events, and supporting clinical research. We're a small organisation doing big things, and we need your support. Please share this video and visit our website to support us and get involved.
Excellent. And now I'm just going to share my screen, which hopefully I can do once I get the hosting right. Ilan, could I please get the hosting so I could share the screen? Thank you.
You already host, Tania.
Okay, that's really weird because okay, cool. Hopefully everyone will be able to see this. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay, so let me make sure I can change these slides. Fantastic. So as we all know, we are experiencing an enormous mental health epidemic at the moment, with 1 in 5 Australian adults pre-COVID with a mental illness. 1 in 8 Australians were on antidepressants pre-COVID, including 1 in 4 older Australians, and 1 in 30 children on antidepressants as young as 4 years of age. We all know in this field that these numbers have been exacerbated significantly throughout this crisis, and many people say that we are in an enormous mental health emergency right now. An estimated 1 in 2 of us will experience a mental illness in our lifetimes. In terms of other parts of the population, we also know that a lot of particular groups, especially veterans and first responders, but also farmers, accountants, veterinarians and other groups, also have a much higher incidence of mental health mental illnesses than the rest of the population. And we can see here veterans and first responders. In addition, there's obviously a massive impact on sufferers. Mental illness leads to increased unemployment, suicide and homelessness. And the cost to the economy at last count was approximately $220 billion, according to the Productivity Commission. But unfortunately, treatments for mental illness haven't improved in approximately 50 years. And so we say that the elephant in the room is the lack of treatments for mental illness. And you can see that elephant there trying to get the attention of the bureaucrats and the politicians and those others. And what we see is that in the case of depression, only 30 to 35% of sufferers experience remission from antidepressants or other pharmacotherapy and or psychotherapy, with significant side effects. And in the case of post-traumatic stress disorder, remission rates are as low as 5%. So we're not getting the majority of patients well. So my husband and I set up Mind Medicine Australia in early 2019 to help alleviate the suffering that is caused by mental illness in Australia through expanding the treatment options available to practitioners like all of you and your patients. Our goal is to establish safe and effective psychedelic assisted therapy treatments to cure a range of mental illnesses. And at the moment, our focus is on psilocybin for the treatment of depression and medicinal MDMA for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder and also addictions. We're also interested in other psychedelic medicines which are being studied around the world. And of course, as you just saw from the video, psilocybin and MDMA are also being used and starting to be investigated for a whole range of other conditions. For us, success means that these therapies become an integral part of our mental health system, that they achieve high remission rates leading to substantial improvement in the current mental health statistics. In current and recent trials, we're seeing remission rates of between 60 to 80% after just 2 to 3 medicinal doses. So that's in contrast to the remission rates that we just showed you of 30 to 35% or 5% for post-traumatic stress disorder. Our goal also is that these treatments become accessible and affordable to all Australians in need, not that they ever get to take the medicines home. These treatments always take place in clinical environments under trained supervision of trained therapists, but they should be available to people regardless of their financial circumstances or where they live. So we have a wonderful board. You can see there the former head of the Armed Forces, Dr. Ellie Kotler, a leading addiction and trauma psychiatrist, Simon Longstaff, the head of the Ethics Centre, who says it's unethical for these treatments not to be made available to Australians who are suffering. Andrew Robb, the former Trade Minister, who's been suffering with depression for 43 years and is on his 13th antidepressant and it's not working for him. Then we have a great team. Some of the ambassadors are the leading researchers and scientists in the world in this field who've dedicated their lives to making these medicines and treatments available to people. and lots of psychiatrists, more psychiatrists on our advisory panel, medical practitioners, emergency physicians, clinical psychologists, psychotherapists, behavioural scientists, pharmacologists, religious leaders, lawmakers, public health experts, anthropologists, and so on. I'm not going to go through that in great detail because it's all on our website. So let's focus now on what actually happens in these sessions. So as I mentioned earlier, what's remarkable here is that just 2 to 3 medicinal doses in combination with a short course of psychotherapy leads to complete remission for between 60 to 80% of patients. So the medicines are curative, not palliative, and they're very safe in medically controlled environments and non-addictive. Both have been granted breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA in the US to fast track the approval process. And this designation is only given to medicines that could be vastly superior to existing treatments. It's a very rare designation. So Nigel and Trail are now going to describe how the actual treatments work in a clinical environment. And of course, there's going to be a lot of time to talk about, to answer your questions. There's 250 of you on here now, so we know you're going to have a lot of questions. And we're going to go through some of the trial data as well, so you can see some of the safety and efficacy data as well. Over to you guys.
Thanks, Tania. So as you can see here, we've got a structured program, and what most of the trials are doing are forwarding a very, very similar structure of detailed screening of applicants, whether people are coming in for treatment for depression or PTSD, depression for psilocybin, as Tania said, depression, PTSD, MDMA treatment. They go through a screening process and then a detailed preparation process. So people are assessed for suitability, then they're explained what this very radical and different way of utilising medication looks like for a number of people who have not had experiences with either empathogens or with psychedelics. So we go through a process of really supporting the person, helping them understand what might happen, setting their intention around what it is that they want to get from treatment. And that's always done continuously with a treating therapist. The medicine session's then introduced, and that's supported by always with a dyad. So preferably a male and female therapist in the room throughout the session. And these sessions typically can last up to 8 hours, so they're very labour and time intensive. Held not in a clinical setting, so not in a hospital bed in a ward, but in a really beautifully appointed, comfortable, motel-like setting, something kind of really homey. Once the medicine session has ended, we then go through a process of what we describe as integration. So helping people to understand what happened in session, helping them make sense of it, but not in a therapeutic and determinant way, but in a supportive, creative way. So initially it starts with artwork or other types of expression, diarising, and then we move over the next few weeks, we move through a process of increasingly detailed integration, moving into a more narrative integration. Then we move to preparation for another medicine session, and depending on the specific needs and characteristics of the patient, that might be a higher dose session than the previous session, depending on the medicine and the structure, which again moves into that integration phase and eventually into cessation. So it's a contained structure. Now this is done for trial purposes, obviously for research purposes, and trials vary between 12 and 20 weeks in general. And what we're suggesting as part of our training in the CPAT is that contained 12 to 20 session model is a really good one for us to manage and to think about as therapists. So that's really what we're training people to work in, this structured defined way. So, you know, when people might be seeking treatment for PTSD that might go for years, this treatment is very much a time-limited treatment. Anything you'd like to say about that trial? You're on mute there.
No, I guess one of the important things is to distinguish between the trial protocols and the different types of trials that have been conducted, and the transition from trial protocols into therapy. And as everyone here will know, there's a big difference between a clinical trial and therapeutic application on a day-to-day basis. And that's something that we're working really hard to do at Mind Medicine, is really make this transition from the evidence that's produced in the trials, but also balancing that out with clinical knowledge and sound clinical practice, you know, with more diverse, more complex, comorbid patients, etc. So I think that's a really important thing to just add into those points, those excellent points Nigel made.
Thanks, Trell.
Mute. Sorry. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We'll be coming back to you very shortly. It's important to say that for many patients, this is ranked as one of the top 5 most meaningful experiences in their lives. You know, whoever says that about a medicine, normally speaking, and that's due to the sense of connectivity and oneness, and a sense of expanded consciousness or awareness that helps people to feel more connected to themselves, to others, and to the planet. And as you would all appreciate, many people describe depression or other mental illnesses as a sense of disconnection, of isolation and separation.
It's a wonderful point, Tania, that you make there. We really, aren't we? The whole model that we're working with is one of growth and development. So we're helping people emerge from what's sometimes described in the literature as the default mode network, which is the rigid structure of adaptation to environment that's generally what people bring to us in suffering. And we offer a therapy that provides an experience beyond that. So Tania's very, very clearly and rightfully pointing to what's sometimes described as the numinous, an experience beyond. And it's really, that's where we talk about the process of integration. We try and help people make a different type of meaning in their lives from the state of suffering, be it trauma, be it depression.
I think that's an excellent point, Nigel. And I guess just to reiterate that, in some ways, what this is a continuation and a development of both the humanistic and the transpersonal kind of attitude towards human potential and human growth. And it's very, very interesting, of course, that you know, Nigel uses the term numinous, and many of you have studied Jung will be familiar with Jung's sentiment that a person can only be truly healed once they've had a numinous experience. And it certainly seems that the research is proving that correct.
That's fascinating. And that also, that other word that's often used, guys, ineffable. Did you want to comment on that one as well? That ineffable.
Oh, I mean, part of the question of contacting these, you know, in 80% of cases where psilocybin is administered in a clinical setting, you'll have some kind of significant mystical experience. How does one find words? How does one explain? This is one of the things that we have to navigate very carefully in a clinical setting, is the balance between the attempt for that kind of thinking, rational mind to try and encapsulate the experience, and at the same time, what we're trying to do is maintain an openness to the experience. And that balance is really at the heart of what a lot of the integration work is about doing. We use the language often of what we need to try and do is stabilize the view. So the person has the experience, as many of you, I'm sure, are probably thinking right now, is we know that states don't correspond to traits or stages. So we know that doesn't happen by necessity, but it can. And with good clinical support, we think that you're able to increase the likelihood of creating that profound state into something more stable. And that's at the very heart of the work.
And we're only talking about brief work. We're talking about 2 to 4 sessions of preparation. We're talking about 2 to 4 sessions of integration after each medicine session. So we're not talking about extensive tracks of psychotherapy. This is a relatively brief therapeutic intervention. And so with the end of the phase 3 trials in the US for PTSD, for instance, they're getting up to 80% remission rates. And whilst this is relatively recent outcome research, we haven't got multi-year follow-up, but we're certainly looking like these remissions are stable.
Absolutely. We will speak further about those in a moment in the clinical trials part as well.
So there's a can I just address, there's a question here about which therapeutic models are used in the trials, and that's an excellent kind of question. So in the trials, there are essentially purely neurobiological trials which go on, where essentially it's the medicine with as little therapeutic interference as possible. There is the approach, which I guess is predominantly applied, which is established out of the work of Groff, which we would describe as, I guess, a non-interfering model of attunement, presence, and support. And then also what is currently quite popular is the introduction of ACT as a therapeutic model. We certainly, encourage diversity in these views, but we take, I guess, a middle path which focuses on these kind of basic Groffian principles of non-interference, or doing, not doing, and using, in particular, we work in a strong collaborative and metacognitive framework, and that has good utility because it's non-denominational and it's available for everybody. So it doesn't require people to be particular adherents to one therapeutic model.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Trail. So what we'll I'll just whiz through a couple more slides and then we'll answer some more questions as well. So there, of course, you can see a patient undergoing the treatment. So 2 wonderful caring therapists supporting the patient. There's the dyad that Nigel mentioned. The patient has an eye mask on because, of course, the whole process is about really going inwards. And the patient usually has headphones on because there's a specially curated playlist that really is designed to match the different stages of these fairly lengthy medicinal sessions. So the playlist is actually curated to match each different phase of those sessions. And you can see here the strong safety record. There's been no adverse events whatsoever. Well, one adverse event where someone had a heart rate that went a bit high, but it was immediately resolved, and that was just because the patient hadn't disclosed their heart condition, probably because they didn't want to be excluded off the trial. Anyway, so we have thousands and thousands of patients who've gone through these treatments in the past 10 to 15 years, as well as, of course, all the patients who went through treatments in the 50s and 60s, which we'll talk about shortly. I'm just sorry, I've just got to get back. Here we are. And this is also a really interesting slide which shows the relative safety of different drugs in recreational circumstances. So you can see here that alcohol is by far the most dangerous drug to self and others, whereas down the other end, you can see that even in recreational environments, MDMA and psilocybin are considered to be extremely safe in their purest form. They get a bad name when they're mixed with other substances combined with dehydration and alcohol at dance parties and raves and festivals. But in their pure form, it's almost impossible to overdose on psilocybin. I think you have to have 45 kilograms of it to be at risk of death. So, and that's pretty impossible. You wouldn't be able to ingest that amount. As well, we received some remarkable testimonials from patients who are undergoing these treatments, either in underground situations or through the trials. And you can see here someone at the bottom this last quote, who said, felt like I went through 15 years of psychological therapy in one night. So significant. And 1 week of intensive treatment provided transformational healing. So it is a really profound form of treatment that we're talking about here, and very different to what is around at the moment. Sadly, of course, we also receive an enormous amount of desperate emails and calls from people who are really struggling and have tried multiple different modalities to heal their mental illnesses. And so we do need to rapidly work together to try and make these treatments available to Australians as soon as possible. So this is the normal effect size on the Cohen's-d scale, the antidepressants for depression, normal effect size around about 0.3, and you're seeing there psilocybin for depression at about 2.0 to 3.1, or MDMA for PTSD at 1.17 to 1.24. So these effects are really off the charts. And this is what I think was it Trail or Nigel just spoke about, the default mode network. I think that was you, Nigel, mentioned that. And you might want to further add to what I'm just going to say here, so that what is remarkable about these treatments, and particularly in the case of psilocybin, is that psilocybin really is like a lock fitting into a key fitting into a lock in terms of tapping into our 5-TH2A receptor, a serotonin receptor, and psilocybin quietens down parts of our brain, and in particular our default mode network, which Nigel just referred to, which keeps us stuck in our rigid patterns, programs and styles of repetitive styles of thinking. And you can see that represented here on these representations of fMRI scans. So the one on the right, which is the placebo, someone who's got those very stuck and rigid thought patterns. The parts of the brain are not really communicating very well. And then on the left, you have the intervention with the psilocybin, this increased massive neurogenesis. Lots of neural connectivity between different parts of the brain, increased neural plasticity, and you can see this sense of connection that we were talking about before, this numinous. And for many researchers and clinicians, they describe this as resetting or rebooting the brain. It's like when your computer plays up and you turn it off and miraculously it's fixed. And the fact that, this could actually work by using these sorts of medicines combined with therapy is really significant. And these medicines do create a window for wonderful therapists like all of you on this call to make really much more significant and rapid progress with patients who are resistant to a whole range of other treatments. Would you guys like to expand on this slide?
Sure. So if you think of the human brain as having kind of 3 layers of processing, you've got a sensate layer, it's all our muscle memory, our body memory. You've got an affective layer, which is our limbic brain, which is our animal social brain. And then we've got our cortex, which is our more kind of distinctly human thinking brain. The default mode network is a pattern of interconnection with these more primitive parts of the brain that set up processes of adaptation to environment. So, as Tania is saying, when we take a dose of psilocybin, the brain lights up. There's an increased interconnectivity around the cortex. The impact of the limbic brain, the affective brain, is reduced. So survival-based emotional responses are slowed and limited. The patterns of operation are reduced, and opportunity emerges. As I said earlier, it's an incredibly hopeful and very creative way of working with therapy, because traditionally things like antidepressants operate on the suppression of activity in the limbic brain rather than the stimulation of activity in the cortex and the bridging between the limbic and the cortical. So this is a possibility building treatment. So it's not simply the medicine though, as Trail was saying before. It's how we support it therapeutically, how we support it with our knowledge, how we support it in the setting, how we support clients clients in really learning to see things differently. And that's really a couple of the comments that came through earlier. This is a very different way of doing therapy. This is about creating positive change. As I was saying, we take a state that occurs under the medicine, and then if we work properly and appropriately and supportively, we can turn that into a stage change. We can change the way that someone experiences themselves and their world permanently.
There's just a question here that I wanted to ask one of you guys. I mean, there's heaps of questions and we'll come back to a lot of them. From Karen, who says EFT has been used very successfully with veterans and trauma patients as well. It's faster and no drugs. Hang on a sec. So I'm just having trouble reading this. So,
I mean, I'm not completely familiar with the research. I mean, EFT is obviously, a fantastic therapy, but the rates of therapeutic effectiveness for trauma are notoriously low. Even in effective treatments. They're, we're still
5%. We know that.
Yeah, but that's for general treatment. But I mean, for specific psychotherapies, maybe they're as high as 30%, but that's still a long way away from 80%. And
yes.
So the value, I guess what I would encourage people to think about this is it's not a panacea. It's not an answer to everything. What it is it's an augmentation to existing therapeutic skills and knowledge, which can be applied within a lot of frames of reference. So EFT, ACT, whatever it is that people are trained in, we can apply this to augment and support that process. And I think it's really important to frame it in that kind of register.
Thank you. That's great. And with EMDR as well, of course. Yeah. Okay. So the other thing that we see with the trials is these increasing remissions over time. So as Nigel and Trail have explained, with the integration that takes place, the patient continues to then become more of an agent for their own healing and to see things differently. And this is what's leading to these increasing remissions. And as most of us, know, this is very unusual because usually with existing treatments, a patient may have an initial uplift and quite often will plateau out and then quite often drop down where, the prescribing physician will then say, well, we have to double the dose or we have to change the medicine altogether and try something different. And so it's remarkable to see these increasing remissions, and we'll comment on that further shortly. But it's important to say that in an end-of-life trial that was done for patients with a terminal diagnosis at New York University about 5 years ago, 80% of the patients did go into remission from their existential distress, stress, anxiety, depression, and so on. And they went back last year to those patients, and what was remarkable is the majority of those patients were still alive, but also all of them were still in remission, the ones who were still alive as well. So that's a pretty good indication that there are some sustaining results occurring with these treatments, particularly where people get proper integration support post the medicine sessions, which is an integral part, obviously, of the treatments, which is why they're called psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. It's not just the medicine on its own. And you can see that here with this slide about MDMA, because of course, again, we say MDMA, we're not talking about ecstasy. This is pure medicinal grade MDMA, not adulterated, which of course, Nigel, did you want to talk about MDMA and why it works so effectively, or Trail?
Yeah, well, I mean, Nigel can speak to this as well, but essentially the process with the MDMA is you downregulate limbic activity whilst increasing kind of relational connectivity, which allows people to approach, difficult experiences, memories, etc., in a manner which allows for both affective augmentation, but also processing of memory.
Yeah, that's right. It downregulates the amygdala. So what happens is our flight, fight, freeze responses are lessened, so that people are then able to approach. They're able to approach memory phenomena, which is often what people are doing, avoiding traumatic experience, so they can more safely approach their own memory and also feel more connected experience with therapists. So it's a corrective trust building experience.
Absolutely. And in the MAPS phase 2 trials, which led to the current MAPS phase 3 trials, which we're going to look at in a moment, there was 105 patients. They all had an average of PTSD for 18 years, so their suffering was immense. And it was treatment resistant. And 52% of them went into remission immediately after the 3 medicinal sessions with a short course of psychotherapy. But 68% of them had gone into remission at the 12-month follow-up. And that led to the current phase 3 trials, which are being supervised by the FDA. And so we now see around the world that these medicines are being trialled for dementia, for anorexia and other eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, a range of addictions, now looking at Parkinson's, schizophrenia, stroke, cluster headaches, and so on. It really is a really fast emerging field. We're also seeing that special access schemes have been set up, including in Australia through SASB pathways that enable psychiatrists or prescribing physicians to apply to the regulator, in our case the TGA, on a case-by-case basis for patients who are treatment resistant and who are suffering deeply. They could be suicidal. And there's been over 40 SASB approvals made in Australia so far to psychiatrists who have those patients. So that's being made at a federal level. Unfortunately, at a state level, we still have various state barriers that don't recognise these medicines as medicines. They're still classing them as recreational drugs, which of course they're not in medically controlled environments, which is why we've recently applied last year to the TGA for rescheduling these substances from Schedule 9, which is prohibited substance, to Schedule 8, controlled medicine. And the TGA has just recently announced an independent review of those submissions, which is a positive sign. The Australian government also has made the largest grant available of any federal government in the world of $15 million towards clinical trials, and those should be announced shortly. As well, a number of states are starting to legalise psilocybin for therapeutic use, including Oregon and other US states. The Canadian government also legalising psilocybin for terminally ill patients and some PTSD patients. And these are the results of 2 recent trials, very significant trials. This first one at Imperial College, directly comparing 2 sessions of psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, so 2 medicinal doses of psilocybin with a short course of psychotherapy against an antidepressant, escitalopram, a daily dose of escitalopram for 6 weeks, plus a short course of psychotherapy. And at the end of that trial, the remission rates were twice as high in the psilocybin group as the antidepressant group. Psilocybin worked more quickly as well, had fewer side effects and less suicidal ideation. So that was a very significant trial, and that was in the New England Journal. So you can have a look at that yourselves. And then the MAPS phase 3 trial in the Nature Medicine Journal. That's the phase 3 part 1 results, which showed that 67% of participants after 3 MDMA assisted therapy sessions with a short course of psychotherapy no longer classified for a PTSD diagnosis, and 88% experienced a clinical meaningful reduction in symptoms. And it is expected that with further integration that the remission rate could go up to 80%, as Nigel just mentioned before. So now this phase 3 trial is in its part 2, and it's expected that if all goes according to how it's gone in the phase 2 and part 1 trial of phase 3, that MDMA will become a prescribable medicine in the USA in the next 12 to 18 months, and that Europe and Australia will follow soon after, which is very exciting. We're also seeing universities all over the world who have advanced research and development programs, including Yale, Oxford, Harvard, and Imperial College. It's wonderful to see that, and many centres of excellence announced around the world as well. And we hope to set up one in Australia shortly as well. And of course, these medicines have been with us since ancient times, in the Greek and Roman cultures, also in many of the Indigenous cultures, and they're still used legally in many Indigenous cultures and religious cultures around the world. And of course, in countries like the Netherlands and many countries, these medicines are actually legal. In the 50s and 60s, over 40,000 patients took part in therapeutic psychedelic sessions in medically controlled environments, and psychedelics were considered the next big thing in psychiatry. Now, Stan Groff there, who Nigel's a wonderful, what do I call you, Nigel? one of sort of the great students of Stan Groff. Stan Groff there says psychedelics would be for psychiatry what the microscope is for biology and medicine, or the telescope is for astronomy. And that's how significantly these medicines are viewed by a whole range of different clinical professionals around the world. Did you want to comment any further on this history, Nigel, or shall we move on to the next slide and get to the...
Well, there's a really deep and rich history. I've been working with Stan Groff for over 30 years, off and on, and we've had an incredibly constrained last 40 years since these incredible promises in the 60s and 70s. Stan developed something called holotropic breath work as a kind of analogue state to hold some of the skill and ability for people to keep this tradition going. But it's at the basis of most spiritual traditions have medicine work at their basis. It's certainly a profound tool for exploration.
Should we move to questions, do you think? I mean, we've only
yeah, we will. We'll be there in a moment. Thanks, Trail. So just so everyone understands why these medicines were actually made illegal, it's really important to say that they were politicised by President Nixon. It was not for any scientific reasons at all. In fact, you can see there his advisors saying, did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did, from one of his senior advisors. Professor David Nutt, who's one of our ambassadors, says this is the worst censorship of research and medical treatment in the history of humanity. And you can see there what happened. The trials were burgeoning, and then all research funding stopped because of Nixon's edict. And of course, now we're back up above where we were 50 years ago. But in that 50-year hiatus, of course, there's been a huge spike in loneliness, social isolation, mental illnesses, disconnection, and so on. As well, we see, many for-profit companies around the world emerging in this space who are setting up clinical groups, playing around with the molecules, looking at manufacturing of the medicines and so on. And these companies are being valued at extraordinary amounts. So our goal at Mind Medicine Australia is to build the ecosystem. We focus on awareness and knowledge building, hence why we partner with organisations like PACFA and many other professional bodies to deliver education like this evening's webinar. We have a global webinar series as well. We have a major international medical summit in November, which we'd love to invite you all to join us at. And we have chapters all around Australia to build grassroots awareness and educate. So if any of you out there want Nigel, Trail, anyone from MMA to come and present to, we'd be very open to presenting and providing further education for clinical groups, for hospitals, for universities, or for wherever you come from. Our professional development program, our CPAC course, we're going to talk about in a moment, which is the first ever certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies. And we're in the second intake of that now. Nigel and Trail are the wonderful course directors who lead a faculty of world-class researchers, scientists and clinicians in this space. And we'll show you, well, we'll talk about some of those people like Dr. Gabor Mate, David Nutt, Bill Richards, Francoise Bouzat. Really, many of the leaders in the field are in the faculty for CPAC. We also have some other wonderful courses, which we'll show you in a moment. And then we're also focused on setting up a centre for emerging mental health therapies and, of course, legal and ethical frameworks and clinical rollouts. And we partner with some wonderful clinical groups in Australia to really start some state-of-the-art clinical options for patients and doctors to start using ketamine, which is already legal, but also other psychedelic treatments as they come on, become more available. How you can help, lots of people are asking how they can help. Join our chapters. We've got a wonderful Learn section. Talk to other medical professionals in your groups. Help fundraise and donate, because we are a charity and we can't do this alone. Follow us on social media. We have to talk to lots of politicians, so talk to your politicians and make sure they're up the curve on this, and attend our events, our summit and so on. and all funds raised, of course, go to support professional development and awareness and further knowledge building. Because one of the biggest things we have to get over is the stigma and prejudice around these medicines, which of course shouldn't have been there, but was there since Nixon. So we focus on the data and the science. Let's move on. So this is the certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies. Did you want to briefly talk about that, Nigel or Trail, just to talk about what sort of wonderful clinicians we're getting in the course, or the course at all for the group, or would you like to wait till we go to the Q&A to talk about this?
Yeah, I think let's wait till the Q&A, I think.
Okay, all right. So we encourage all of you to join our intakes. There's huge demand for them. Nigel and Trail, as I mentioned, are the course directors. Nigel and Trail are also leading this wonderful course, which starts in mid-September, which is the Fundamentals of Psychedelic Assisted Therapies, an online course for weeks in a row, and we invite you to get your tickets ASAP. We also have a psychological support service that provides support through psychologists and psychotherapists around Australia for those who want counselling or integration, who might be using the medicines. So some of your patients may be using these medicines, and we can legally provide support to those patients before using those medicines, and for integration support. It's a harm reduction support service that gets supported by the Australian government harm reduction policies. As I mentioned, we have the independent review, and this is who's presenting at the summit. And many of these people are also on the faculty with Nigel and Trail for the certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies. Join your local chapter. And here's some of the upcoming events that we have, and we invite you to join them. They're all free webinars and events, and we look forward to having you as part of them. So we're going to stop the sharing now. We're going to go to the chat, and we are going to, Nigel, Trail, would you like to pick out some of the questions, because there's lots of questions here, and of course pop your questions into the chat, and we'll try and answer as many as we can.
Yeah, so I saw a question before that was repeated a few times. I think Nigel, I can't remember the last name, made a comment about it, which is availability for psychotherapists in the training. So I just want to make a really clear point, is that we're acutely aware of the value that we as psychotherapists bring to the work. As such, we have a multi-tiered register that people go on to after the training. And that is that there are prescribers, so doctors and psychiatrists. There are lead therapists or therapeutic clinicians, which are psychotherapists, counsellors, psychologists, or anyone with an adequate therapeutic training. And then there's support therapists as well for less experienced psychotherapeutic people, or people from allied health, or other such positions. So we're really advocating for a horizontalization of therapeutic approach, where we're not kind of falling into the same trap, which is so dominant in Australia, of this really clear hierarchy, which often sees psychotherapists positioned somewhere to the bottom of the totem pole, even though, you know, produce a lot of efficacious work and do a lot of great stuff. All of you will be familiar with the problems that we have as a profession with Medicare and all those things, but at My Medicine, we're really acutely onto that, and it's something we're trying to address in the training.
And we're also talking to a lot of health insurers as well, and insurers, you know, professional indemnity insurers as well. Sorry, Trail. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just think that's very important, because I understand some of the sentiments are in the chat and some of the concerns, but as a psychotherapist myself, and as a psychotherapist out of, you know, decision, not by being a poor cousin or anything, just want to let people know that that's something we're really attuned to.
There's a question here from Thomas, who says, I mean, Thomas, we won't be able to, because we want to get through a lot of questions, but we'll try and explain this. Could you please explain in more detail how these medicines have the claimed effects?
The medicine, as we've said previously, what the medicine does is it gives the brain an opportunity to organise information in a very different way. So what's important is not purely the medicine, it's what's traditionally referred to as set and setting. The mindset of the person coming into the medicine session, supported by skilled and caring therapists that then help support a change experience in the right environment, and then we look at integrating that changed experience. Yeah. So the medicine provides a window of opportunity.
So I guess I might come at that a little bit differently and say there's a number of registers we could describe that with. Who asked the question? Sorry, can you?
Oh, hang on. Sorry.
Thomas. So I think, Thomas, there's a few different ways of accounting for that. There is the neurobiological accounts, and each medicine has a different kind of action. So they operate differently and have different benefits and their relationship to experiences. But I think it's also important to look at these experiences within a phenomenal register as well, in terms of the what it's like experiences. And in some sense, if you take psilocybin, for example, what you're actually creating is the conditions for what Jaspers or someone like that would have called a boundary experience, you know, in existential psychotherapy. It is a radical reconstitution of how one sees their world and how they see themselves in it. And importantly, one of the things we look at is how those experiences create real jumps in perspective. And so one of the things with psilocybin is that people will often move out of a kind of formal operational register into a post-formal state, which perceives the world within systemic and intersystemic perceptual fields. So what they start to see is their relationship to themselves, their relationship to their family, to the universe, to all those things in between. And as you can imagine, you know, we're in the business of meaning and meaning making, and these experiences give us a great deal to work with in order to shape that. And so I think there's a lot of different registers, or a lot of ways of talking to how psychedelic assisted therapy works. But as Nigel said, I always want to focus on what I like to call a psychedelic therapeutic complex, which is that it's not the medicine alone. It is the experience which matters, hence psychotherapists being so important in the work, because that's what we do. We focus on experience. The quality of that, I think, is really, really important to bring home, because if we just focus on it as a neurobiological process, then we could, if we're not careful, find a situation where people are just given the drug and put in a cold room somewhere. And that's not going to do the work. We know from all the research that's not what it takes. It creates the therapeutic skills, the therapeutic relationship, the set and the setting in which this occurs, plus the medication for these things to work properly.
I think it's important to note also that what we're doing in the CPAT training is bring together a multidisciplinary team. And one of the really interesting outcomes of the training is to see the collegiate experience of psychiatrists, doctors, psychologists, and psychotherapists. We had a podiatrist in our last training. I mean, it's actually a really interesting way of getting a group of professionals together to actually see not so much the limitations of their own kind of professions, but the opportunities for growth, interaction, and development in a collegiate environment. Because what we're seeing is that this medicine work requires more than the skills of one of us. It requires the skills of us working collaboratively, coherently, cohesively as groups of professionals. And that kind of talks to the spirit of mind medicine, which is about creating connection, creating an openness, creating collaboration and intercollegiate relationships around.
Absolutely.
So just to add to that, I mean, you know, one of my favorite experiences was, you know, in our first training, you know, we had a psychiatrist kind of say, well, I'm a biological materialist and I don't believe in any of this stuff. And at the end of the course, him talking about the value that he saw in the counselors and the psychotherapists and all this other work and how valuable it was. And there's a real change in perspective.
And it's a real leveling out, isn't it? Because you know, I'll ask Ilan if he can post the link to some of the testimonials, but to see the testimonials from students about these multidisciplinary groups that are being set up through the course, it's inspirational, because the patient is at the centre.
Yeah, there is.
Whilst the medicine at the moment is only available through trials, and we are actively working in partnership with universities and other medical centres to establish more trials, we are very close to changes in legislation around this. So the idea is that we are training people right now with the anticipation of a demand fairly soon.
Well, absolutely, and the TGA has reiterated that point to us. I mean, they've told us multiple times that they will you know, follow suit from the FDA as soon as MDMA becomes prescribable. But also, we do have our fingers and toes crossed that the medicines will be rescheduled to Schedule 8, and that SASB approvals will start to flow through the states as well. So,
look, there's a question here which has been repeated a few times. Juliet's made this question here about the explosion of, you know, people crying out for this and ayahuasca ceremonies and things like that. I think the thing that's really important for us to stipulate is there's really clear demarcations between clinical use, recreational use, and ceremonial use. And what we're focused is therapeutic use. And ceremonial use is certainly appropriate in traditional cultures. You know, it's obviously very valuable. It's a key part of religious practices all over the world. But that's not the kind of work that we're speaking about. We're not suggesting that ceremonial use is by necessity going to create the kind of changes. What we're saying is that therapeutic use is actually the focus of the work, and that's who we're trying to bring this to fruition for, is the people who have really struggled to find effective treatment elsewhere, and that this is a line which they can pursue, which has good therapeutic efficacy and is safe.
Can I also just say, just for a few of the questions on here, firstly, I just wanted to say that the certificate is already recognised by a number of the professional colleges and associations, including your one, including the AHPRA, the Psychologist one, AHPRA, and a whole range of others. So you do get CPD points through it. And also the government has acknowledged recognition of this through our TGA applications as well. So there's more and more recognition occurring. But Trail and Nigel are also working on other accreditation pathways. Secondly, there's lots of questions here about, is the summit online? And yes, and you're the first group to know that we have moved the 2-day introductory workshop and the summit online. There will be an official announcement about this shortly, and I'm really pleased to let you all know that there's a special password which is MMA 2021, which we're giving to you all tonight, which will give you 10% off any of the packages of the summit, and that's for anyone from PACFA or your friends or communities to use. So I'm really pleased to offer that to all of you as well. And there's other questions here. Sorry, just Trail, did you have another question you wanted to pick out?
Yeah, there was a few comments around its relationship to neurological orientated presentations, and there is a great deal of research going on in that area, from everything from dementia through to autism. I guess the takeaway message there is that these substances, particularly psilocybin, produces strong neurogenesis in the 4 days preceding ingestion, and that neurogenic kind of process is where the value is seen in those current disorders, and the value perhaps for them in application. So if you'd like to look up or explore some of the neurogenic properties of these medicines, there's a great deal of research out there about that currently.
And also, you know, patients are screened for psychotic and at the moment bipolar and schizophrenia and borderline personality disorders are screened out, though some of the psychiatrists that we work with do suggest that those conditions will end up being able to be treated by these.
There's an interesting question from Scott, stating Rick Doblin supports clinicians to know the experience. So the CPAT is a highly experiential training. You might remember in the photo of the setting that Tania showed earlier, one of the therapists holding the patient's hand during session. So touch is an important consideration in our training, which is very unusual for a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists. But we use, as part of the training, we use what MAPS also uses in the United States as an analogue. We do a session of holotropic breath work to give people a lived experience of a non-ordinary state. We know it's not identical, but this is the model that Stan Groff developed when LSD psychotherapy was terminated in the US. He developed holotropic breathwork simply as, or quite clearly as, an analogue state. And we do have an ethics application in for healthy persons trials when that becomes available. So we're certainly at the front of the line for introducing lived experience into the training.
There's a number of questions here about dissociative disorders and whether they're excluded. The simple answer to that is no, they're not. You know, dissociative tendencies are pretty present in a lot of trauma presentations, and that's one of the main interventions that we're looking at using. But it would be clinically relevant and important to be aware of dissociative process and how that manifests. So as clinicians, we can navigate any of those as they might appear in session.
Okay. There's a few questions here also about your 4-week course versus the CPAT course. I mean, obviously the 4-week course is more of an introduction. Did you want to just explain the difference just very briefly, one of you?
Yeah, look, the 4-week course is an introduction, it's an overview, and the CPAT course is a clinical training which is designed to get you recognition within Australia as a psychedelic assisted therapist. So they're very different. The 4-week course, you know, obviously we have people who are interested and wanting to dip their toe in the water before they move into doing the clinical training, which is fine. But we also will have people who are just pursuing general interest as well.
Okay, excellent. Nigel, did you want to pick out any other questions from the chat that you... Oh, there's a question here. Can I still get the early bird for the course? Ilan, I think you're on this call.
Yes, I've answered that. So the early bird is still available for tonight and tomorrow lunchtime.
Oh, that's very lovely of you to extend that. Thank you. Okay, so the early bird gives you $150 off the 4-week course, which makes it incredibly good value.
Yeah.
Any other courses around the world that are similar to that course are about 4 or 5 times more expensive than that 4-week course. So it's a good way to dip your toe in the water.
There's a question here from Juliet again. Perhaps there's a little bit of confusion still, even though Nigel responded to that a moment ago, around whether or not you do experiential psychedelics in the course. No, you don't. Currently, that is because it's illegal in Australia. As Nigel said, there is opportunities for healthy trials that are being explored, and that's something that we will look at. But what we do is we do holotropic breath work as an analogue. And those of you who have done breath work will know that it can produce some pretty strong experiences, which give clinicians both the experience of altered state and also give people the chance to sit with and apply the skills that we're learning.
The other question here that I wanted to respond to, Deborah, have any of you experienced the therapy firsthand? Yes, well, I can certainly disclose that I have, and that's why Peter and I set up Mind Medicine Australia. So we actually had the treatment in the Netherlands, and it was extraordinary. It was so extraordinary that we set up our 5th charity, and we'd vowed never to set up any more charities. So for us to actually...
Yeah, I have experienced it overseas myself as well, over many decades, including trips into the South American Amazon.
Yeah. I've experienced the mid-offer protocols, or the what's used in the MAPS as a patient, and found it very, very useful as well.
Life-changing, life-changing. And I should say, for those of you who ask if we have any conflicts of interest to disclose, no. Peter and I are philanthropists. We donate our time 100% to this, and pretty much all of our money. And we're doing this because we see the huge levels of suffering in the community, and we feel that it's really wrong to withhold treatments from people that could change their lives and reduce the amount of suffering and suicides that are here today. It's, you know, so many of them are avoidable, and these treatments are truly extraordinary. Other questions?
There's a question there about addiction to psychedelics, and I guess what we can say there very clearly is they are very low in addictive quality, and what we use in the treatment is only a couple of repeat sessions. What we tend in psychedelics or empathogenics is people can get fixated on the state, so they loop back, and people keep looking for repetition in this work when people are doing it in an uncontained or non-clinical setting. That's probably the main problem. So we're really big on integration and helping people understand what is changing due to the medicine.
Yeah. Also, Anna out there who asked about booking the 2-day introductory course. Ilan, there seems to be a problem there. Could you look at that on the chat, please? That would be really good. Also, some people are asking about the price level of the CPAT course. So the CPAT course is a 4-month part-time course. It's quite an intensive course to work alongside your professional work. It has a world-class faculty, and obviously you do get CPD points for it as well. But Nigel, do you want to just explain? And also we do have scholarships for that. So if you are in financial need and you can demonstrate that to us, we do have a limited amount of scholarships for outstanding students as well. So we do our very best to make it as inclusive as possible. But Nigel, did you want to comment just on the price point of the CPAT course? Because I've seen a few questions there.
The price point, so we allow, or we create as much opportunity for people to pay off in instalments and that kind of thing. So we're as flexible as we can be in making this available. I think Joel mentioned earlier, if you look at some of the overseas costs for these sort of courses, this is a pretty attractive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to compare that to something like the MAPS training or something like that, it's probably more than double, I think, in terms of costs. So it is expensive, but it's certainly worth it. And if you are interested in this field, I mean, if you check out the faculty of people that are involved in the teaching, it is literally anybody you could ever want to learn from in this field. People who've been there from the very beginning to the leading researchers in the space at the moment. My Medicine's done an extraordinary job of compiling the best of the best to bring that knowledge to Australia. And
I think we have the best faculty in the world by far.
Yeah.
Yeah, so please though, if you need help or you need support, or we don't want to exclude people from this training. But that being said, I mean, we do have enormous demand for the course, so we're thrilled with the diversity of people who are applying for the course. And our next intake 3, which starts in early February 2022, is nearly full right now, and it's only August. Any other questions? Let's see, Nigel, Trail, any other questions? Can you foresee an opportunity for employment opportunities when this becomes legal with your organisation? Well, absolutely. I mean, Nigel, Trail, did you want to comment on that in terms of the trials, in terms of SASB and other clinical practices that we're setting up and so on?
Well, we're expanding this. This is an organisation that's pioneering a whole new approach to psychotherapy. So we're expanding in our training, we're expanding in our practice, we're expanding in our support services, our professional development seminars. So what we're really wanting to build is a vibrant ecosystem, a community of people who are passionate about this work, and our role is to support the development of the work, to support clients to really work with people to develop best practice around the world in doing psychedelic assisted therapies. So we welcome, and yeah, there will be opportunities.
I think it's important that as clinicians you recognise that this space is coming, and it's going to be an important space for us to be prepared to move into. I think it's really paramount, and that, you know, what we're doing in My Medicine currently is something which is really unique, which is that we're setting the ground to allow this to be done in an ethical and appropriate way. There's a lot of effort that goes into making sure that this is not just taken over, you know, by interests other than the best interests of the people that we're treating and that we're working with. And as a result of that, I think the other message that I'd like to leave you all with is that the kind of approach we're developing is one which is looking to honour what already exists within a group like this in terms of the therapeutic skills and knowledge and capabilities. And it's not a way of saying that what you do doesn't work or is not right, but rather it's to say, how do we take the existing knowledges from psychotherapists, counsellors, psychologists, psychiatrists, GPs, how do we take all these important approaches to human healing and have them meet in a meaningful way? And that to me is probably the most exciting part of this work, is that we're really looking at a redefinition of the space.
I just want to say, Trail, that is just such a beautiful explanation, because, you know, when you look at the incredible practitioners in the course and what each of them brings and their wisdom and knowledge, and the way that you synthesize that with this new modality, it's really inspirational. So, yeah. It's a testament to, you know, we're very fortunate at Mind Medicine Australia to have Nigel and Trail leading this course, and I just want to thank you guys for everything you're doing. And someone just said, is Big Pharma likely to shut this down? Well, I have Peter Hunt here, who's our chairman. Peter, do you want to just quickly comment on that?
I think the evidence is just too compelling, and the momentum is too compelling. But you know, we've got to be aware that there will be people shooting from the sidelines, and we've always got to respond to them with the data and the science, and why this is just so important, and that the patient at the end of the day is what we're all here for, to prevent this terrible suffering.
Yeah, that's right. And at the moment, yes, we are the only organisation in the Southern Hemisphere that offers this training, but in terms of our faculty, it is the leading faculty in the world, and to be actually having, you know, direct sessions with people like Gabor Mate, like Bill Richards and David Nutt and Rick Doblin and others is just such an incredible experience for everyone who's involved, including the faculty and the students, of course, is significant. So with that, I mean, thank you all for sticking around. We're sorry we've gone over time. We're sorry we rushed through the presentation, but there's a lot to cover, but we will be sharing it with you. And we'll be sending out a thank you note tomorrow or tomorrow or the next day with the recording that you can share as well, and with the presentation and other information. So there is hope, there is light in this dark tunnel that we're in, and we just want to invite you all to be part of this movement with us. And if there's any quick last questions, we'd be happy to open up a mic for people as we sort of, before we close down altogether, if Nigel and Trail are happy to stay on for another couple of minutes. Are you guys okay?
Sure.
Yeah. So, you know, if you want to put up your hand, or we can unmute you and you can say hi and we can connect, because it feels like it's horrible, these Zoom, aren't we all sick of Zooms at the moment? But, you know, it's better than nothing, I guess. But yeah, if you've got a question, just please let us know, and we can look at the gallery and Yes, there's a question there from Susan Morrison. So Susan, can we unmute you? Ilan, can you unmute Susan?
I've done it.
Oh, good. Okay.
I couldn't work out how to send my. I just asked if there was a way to give feedback to you for this session. Is there a way to?
Absolutely. Yes. You can
write.
do that.
Yeah.
So any feedback we welcome. Any ways that we can improve, we welcome. And if you send it, you can either send it to me, so that's Tania, Tania @mindmedicineaustralia.org, or we have just an admin email as well. And that's on our website, Susan.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed the session.
Yeah, I wanted to say some things, but yeah, just very interesting. Thank you.
That's a pleasure. And any questions too, and we understand that we haven't been able to answer all the questions. So yes,
sometimes it's complicated. Yeah.
It is. Louise has got a question there. Louise, can you unmute yourself or not?
Hi.
Yes.
So you were speaking about the therapy being done in dyads with two people, preferably male, female. So would that, in that case, would both of the people need to be the CPAP registered and qualified to do that? Yeah. And is one of them the therapist? One of them's more health, or could it be two therapists?
We've got three levels of registration. So we've got the medical, so you need a medical degree to prescribe medication. So they need to either be on site or present. We have a lead therapist who basically runs through the whole process, preparation, medicine sessions and integration. And then a support person who's always present at the medicine sessions and may be involved in some of the therapeutic sessions as well.
Cool. Thank you very much for that question, Louise. And there was Juliet, was it? Someone had their hand up.
If I can
Yes.
Sorry, Trail, go ahead.
So just to finish on Louise's point, there is diversity in those roles. So the supporting therapist could otherwise be a lead therapist in a different context if they were sufficiently trained. A doctor who, like a psychiatrist who has psychotherapeutic training, could be the lead therapist. But what we're really trying to make sure is that the therapy is front and center to the work. That's all I wanted to say about it.
Someone's just saying they just signed up for the fundamentals course. Is there much practical information in it? Just a question there.
Yeah, there'll be some practical stuff, but it obviously won't be enough to sufficiently train someone to be a practitioner.
The 2-day introductory workshop for the summit will also have more practical work, but it's not as significant as the CPAP course. Juliet, your question.
You may have already said this, and I'm sorry if I missed it. Where are the trials happening? Which country?
Well, they're happening. There's about 160 current or recent trials, and probably there's new trials being announced all the time, but there's quite a number of trials taking place in Australia at the moment as well. So many of you might know about the end-of-life one at St Vincent's that has been going for a couple of years. There's also an anxiety trial that's taking place with psilocybin at Monash. Which other trials? There's the
St Vincent's
PTSD trial.
Ice trial.
Which one?
Ice.
Oh, there's the St Vincent's Ice trial, the one with the Myria as well.
MDMA is being developed at Monash University. We've got trials in Canada, North America, right throughout Europe.
And is your website the place to go to find out when the trials are and when you're recruiting people?
Yes. So Ilan, who's on this call, Ilan, could you share that trials document? Because we've got a wonderful, we're doing some wonderful work sort of really documenting all the trials that have either taken place.
I'll just put that in the chat now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ilan, would you also be able to include that in your thank you note so that everyone has a link to the trials? I'm sure he will. Other questions? Is there any other hands? Let's see, just through the list. Okay. If there's not any other live questions, I don't think there's any other live questions. So with that, I hope I haven't missed someone, but is that you, Jeff, having a question? No. Okay. Good. All right. Well, look, we just want to say thank you to all of you. We hope to do some more webinars with PACFA. Amazing, you know, amount of interest. Obviously, psychotherapists are absolutely a key to psychedelic assisted therapies, and we really look forward to meeting you and gathering with you, hopefully in person at some events in the future. And for those of you that are near any of our chapters, please join the chapters. It's a wonderful way to get to know other people in your local communities who are interested in this space, not just clinicians, but also researchers, also people just in the general community who can really help move the needle and make sure that these treatments do come available as soon as possible to prevent further suffering and suicide. So with that, blessings to you all. Thank you for all your beautiful wisdom, the incredible work you do in the community. It means a lot. And thank you to Trail and Nigel and PACFA. Woohoo. Thank you all.